Welcome to The Golden Shadow. My name is Arran Rogerson.
And I'm Alyssa Polizzi.
We're here with our second guest ever, Peter Limberg, the creator of The Stoa, which is a online event space, a pseudo community, and something that is developing maybe into something greater and more powerful than that. But we'll have to wait and see. How are you doing, Peter?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
We are honored to have you here.
Yeah, welcome, Peter.
So I want to start off with your personal journey of individuation, let's say, or your personal journey of self-development. I know that you were a Stoic for a while, and you had a Stoic meetup that you led. How did you get into this realm of self-work or self-actualization?
Well, I'd still identify, I guess, as a Stoic, or technically I would say I'm a modified Stoic because I don't fully adopt a philosophy wholesale. But my sort of inner work, personal development journey began when I was a teenager, maybe 17 years old. That was when I was introduced to philosophy. I was reading all these deep books at first. And then I started reading self-help, like Napoleon Hill, Dale Carnegie. That was sort of my entry point, just hyper practical things. And then just, if you see my bookshelf, like I have hundreds and hundreds of books, and they're so eclectic. There's no one kind of like genre you can pinpoint. So I engaged in sort of kind of spiritual threads, philosophical threads, and psychological threads. And I can't remember how Jung or shadow work came on my radar, but it did. And some of the techniques like active imagination that I sort of experimented with were quite helpful. But yeah, there's no like consistent method. It was very bespoke journey. It was very messy journey, not glamorous at all. And I didn't really have, I had a series of coaches and mentors later on. Andrew Taggart, who you recently interviewed, Arran, and then Jordan Peterson was my therapist for 2 years, and did a lot of dream work with him and shadow work with him. But the kind of the consistent through line was sort of a Stoic thread too. I found that grounded me with all these sort of experiments that I engaged in. So yeah, it wasn't like a perfect timeline there, but that is sort of gives you a sense of what my journey was with inner work and personal development.
17's quite young, I feel, to really begin this journey. I'm curious if there's maybe just like a natural inclination that you had to start exploring this at a young age, or was there any sort of monumental event that really spurred you to dive into that self-development?
I don't know. When I was, I had a pretty decent childhood. Most of the memories are pretty sunny. And then there was an event that happened when I was younger. It was quite like socially traumatic. And I had a bunch of, I don't want to go too much into it, but a bunch of people gang up on me. This was around grade 8. And I felt really socially isolated, which led to social anxiety, I would say. And then that inhibited me in a lot of ways in high school. I was somewhat of a loner, had, a few close friends, but didn't fulfill that kind of social potential. And so I think that informed a lot of inward looking, which was not something that, I did much beforehand. I was very active into sports and stuff like that. And so when sort of being liberated from high school, I fast tracked high school, got into university a year early, and it felt like freedom, like, and most of I got in for philosophy at the University of Toronto, and most of the books I read were outside of the classroom too. Like I was one of those type of guys that just showed up to hand in his essay and then showed up for the exam. And then I just did my own thing throughout the whole year and somehow got decent enough grades to pass. But most of my reading was outside of the classroom. But yeah, so there was no real kind of like big event that I could point to, but probably has something to do with the social trauma and then being somewhat of a loner and alienated, and developing an acquired taste with that state too during that time. And I imagine that was responsible for making me go inward and doing that type of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, they have an experience of embarking upon the path of self-work or inner work, which is often a very personal thing or a very solitary thing. Like I know it was for me, and I think it probably kind of was for Alyssa too. But you did at one point seem to get activated by the idea of organizing groups or communities, and that certainly seems to be a real gift of yours now, is not just the personal work, but sort of like the collective work or the community work. And I'm wondering if there was a certain point where that kind of clicked for you, is like you wanted to go more in that direction of building something for a lot of people, or if it was just sort of a natural inclination to begin with, where like you always felt very oriented towards like group work as opposed to sort of the more solitary, like inward turning work.
Well, I was kind of doing both, I would say. I was always a natural leader. Like I was the sort of the most popular kid in the schoolyard, so to speak. Kind of, I was like the little alpha male. Always got chosen first for the soccer team or the basketball team. Yeah, so I always had that. I was accustomed to being in a leadership role amongst most of the social groups I was in when I was young, on the sports teams and just in like I said, in the playground. And then, so it was an interesting contrast from being kind of like the most popular person, the social nexus, as some would say, in the pickup artist scene, to being a complete loner. It's like, it was like night or day. So I felt like kind of the best of both worlds. I taste both of them. And I got pretty good at both of them, or like, I got good enough. And so when I started kind of going through the social trauma and getting more confident, I started experimenting with groups. A lot of them were private groups at first, a lot of men's groups, did mastermind groups, did sort of like secret debate clubs, all in service of, betterment. And those sort of, I still have them today, these private groups. But there was a point too where I think I told my brother, because when meetup.com, that website first came around, I told my brother, hey, you should do this. And he did it, and he created he's into like the gaming kind of nerd culture, or geek culture as they call it. And then he created like one of the most popular geek cultures in Toronto. And I just kind of like took his, strategy for that, and then created these philosophy groups. One of them was Stoicism. The other one was more of a kind of a performative agnostic kind of like intellectual thing. And I combined both of those groups basically to become the Stoa, the online space that you mentioned.
Have you found through this experience of starting to facilitate groups that it brought some nuance to your own personal journey of self-development and individuation? Did people bring in some new threads, modalities that really caught on for you? or kind of being in that center of so many other people kind of bringing in their own material and energy. I'm just curious how that really impacted you through these experiences.
Well, there's so much things you pick up that you don't even know what you pick up.
Yeah.
Like being in a bunch of groups, and I've been in various kind of, like I said, private and public groups, pretty much at the center. And I was when I was a kid as well. And you learn a lot, and you don't even know basically what you become skilled at. You just become good at sort of feeling a room, feeling a group, knowing who's upset, knowing who has not been heard, and then holding space for that. And so a lot of the stuff I can't even say what exactly I learned. I'm sort of like learning it now by kind of journaling every day and kind of teasing a lot of it out. But that definitely was informative on my development, being with other people and growing with them.
Yeah, it's this whole other level of complexity, I think, as you start to add in the communal layer or even just smaller groups. I don't know, Arran, I think you could sort of speak to that too, is it sort of amplifies this energy of self-development and philosophical exploration where people start to really work off each other in this incredibly dynamic way. And you amplify both, I think, in positive and sometimes negative ways too.
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, the complexity rises very quickly once you start adding people. And as you move from like 3 people to 4 people, like the complexity just jumps up like crazy. So I definitely think there's sort of a mutual amplification that can happen. And people serve as important mirrors for your own work to say, like, is your work actually working? And, are you still kind of being an asshole and you don't realize it? And that's the importance of groups. But at the same time, I think that groups can totally derail your own personal development if they are not serving as people who want to push you and help you individuate as much as they're people who kind of want to just perpetuate some sort of social coherence or feel enabled by you. So it's always a matter of the people involved. It's like if you got people you trust, great. If you don't, if you have strangers, it's really a mixed bag, I think.
Right. And I don't have much experience creating or living in intentional communities, like a place like maybe a monastic academy, you can call that. And I imagine that would be quite an interesting experience. Mine was like really tightly knit mastermind or private men's groups that had parameters and interesting like ecology of practices baked in. And then the other ones were just like these wide open like discussion groups that anyone could show. And then the medium there to source the people was Meetup, at least the in-person ones in Toronto. And there's, I find that people who tend to rely on Meetup are people who have social anxiety or they're on their spectrum. They don't have the greatest social skills and they're like pushing themselves out there to exercise that muscle and make friends. So there's a certain kind of energy with that. And then the Stoa is just this weird new thing. Like I think we're all trying to make sense of right now. But it has combinations of both of those.
So I'm kind of imagining, you mentioned private men's group. You also mentioned secret debate club. And I'm kind of imagining, like a skulls club. It's like, there's like this crazy initiation with like mud wrestling and standing outside in the cold as long as possible or things like that. Are these sort of exclusive groups that you need to somehow find your way in and pass the test or what are you actually talking about?
That's not too far from the truth. Some of the stuff that you, we did have like rites of passage to get in. We screened members quite rigorously. I can't tell you all the details, Arran. But,
of course not. You can tell me in private.
Yeah.
There's something to be said though for that type of ritual within a group because those barriers of entry force people to be taking entrance into this group incredibly seriously, and that shifts the energy of who gathers together and making sure that there isn't someone who's kind of ambivalent about it. You commit to it in a way that you're willing to kind of put yourself through these rigors. And that creates a whole new dynamic once you enter into it. There's a commitment, there's a dynamism to it. It's not necessarily something I think we see pretty often nowadays, and especially with the expansion of online meetup groups where anything goes, you get this huge mixed bag of energy. I've had a lot of experience with meetup as well as I was event managing before the pandemic, and you just get a huge spectrum of different people, different areas of life, different energies, some that are incredibly chaotic and unstable, other who are, curious and inquisitive.
Yeah, that's why Alyssa introduced branding into her tarot group. You actually have to get a brand that has the death card on it in order to enter. So
taking notes from NXIVM, I see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is the future of the Stoa in any way going to be more exclusive as time moves on, or do you see the Stoa as remaining a sort of open doors? Anyone who wants to join in at any moment is welcome to come and go as they please, etc.
I don't know, but I think it would be nice to always have that element, because it kind of makes sense. It is a Stoa, a digital colonnade, and colonnade you just come in, come out. But perhaps there's things that are officially associated with it that are more exclusive or private. I'm experimenting with exclusive patron only events now. So there's people have gift in the game. People are gifting me an ongoing gift via Patreon. Then they have access to events, and I'm going to do more intimate kind of experimental events on it. So I'm quite excited to experiment with that. And, I've used Stoa as sort of like an incubator for things like that, whether it's mastermind groups or we're bringing these squad wealth people in, and they have an interesting kind of modality that I'm looking forward to explore. So I like the idea of being an incubator for psychotechnology that allows these communities to grow, emerge, and experiment.
Yeah, I think the internet and what you're really doing with the Stoa affords a incredible amount of creative exploration, and that you can have these different levels that in person would be just really difficult to manage. So it's exciting to see where you're developing it, and kind of doing some of these patron only events brings a different energy to the type of open event that you might see on a weekly basis. So continuing that experimentation, I think, is what keeps the motivation and excitement alive in a project like this.
Yeah, 100%.
So your path eventually led you to academia in some form. You weren't actually going down the normal being a teacher's assistant and going towards being a professor or anything like that, but you were sort of involved in academia in some way at the University of Toronto, right?
Well, like I mentioned, I after I fast tracked high school, I got into university, and I just basically went to university because my parents pressured me.
Yeah.
I had to do something. And then I wasn't. Yeah, I hardly went to any classes. I just sort of the essays and exams. And I had an idea because I really loved philosophy. So I had an idea, maybe I'll be kind of pursue that professional path. But my whole intuition was saying, no, don't do that. And so I'm glad I listened. Yeah, so no. But I'm associated with John Vervaeke and his sort of his lab, and me and him have been doing kind of what we call cowboy research before COVID came online of all these intersubjective modalities. So there's an association and connection there. But beyond that, yeah, I wouldn't call myself an academic.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood then. So how did you start working with John Vervaeke? Or how did you get connected to that lab?
So I knew John. I was sort of like his student in his meditation class when I was at the University of Toronto, because he taught meditations classes at lunchtime. So that's when I first met him. And David Gosley was a grad student of John, and I'm really good friends with David. So I knew John. We weren't that close though. And then when I had my podcast, which was called Intellectual Explorers Club, which was a performative agnostic podcast, which is the same name of the in-person group that I had, I invited John on there, and we just hit it off. We actually got lunch, I think, before or after, and I was telling him all the kind of the intersubjective modalities that I was researching, like circling and stuff like that. And he got just like, his mind was like blown by this stuff exists, and it kind of like mapped over to a lot of stuff he did. And I'm the guy that kind of introduced John to the whole sense making scene. I introduced him to Guy Sangstock, the founder of Circling, who was also on my podcast, and Daniel Thornton. Then John kind of just blew up from there in that scene. And yeah, him and I did a lot of investigation. We went to Insight. What's that one called again? The Buddhistic one. Insight Dialogue, Circling, Verbal Aikido, all these different techniques. And then we had a private circling group bi-weekly, John and I, with actually Lubomir, who did In Shadow, Daniel Kazanjian, and Yasna, who now does the Willow branch of the Monastic Academy. We had a bi-weekly circling group. And then COVID happened, and then John just sort of like, just became like best friends with the guy who founded Circling, which is quite cool. So yeah, that's how John and I met originally and reconnected.
So what I'm hearing is that you're partially responsible for the creation of the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series. Like you were the
I'm not saying that at all. John was, I think he just started launching that series when him and I met. And some of the stuff that we were researching did inform the content of that series, because he's got introduced, he mentioned circling a couple times in it. But what excited him so much was that how compatible these actual practices were with what his conclusions were, how we're going to ameliorate the meaning crisis is getting into deep dialogue, dialogos and whatnot, and how these practices can help and inform that.
And my follow-up to you partially being responsible for Awakening from the Meaning Crisis was that you also had some sort of relationship with Jordan Peterson and might have helped been the pathway for him to get involved in the larger scene of sense-making in some way.
Arran is going to be responsible for the myth of Peter Limberg now, single-handedly. Yes, so Jordan Peterson was my therapist for 2 years before he entered the culture war. And my last session with him was the day he released that pronoun video. And that was not the reason why it was my last session. It just happened to be that way. And then, and it was really cool.
There seems to be this interesting hub at the University of Toronto, which has felt very compelling from the outside to see these pretty dynamic figures, or at least a lot of energy around this exploration. Do you agree with that in any way? Is there any other campuses or other areas of collegiate level academia or exploration that you feel has matched what you've seen happening at University of Toronto?
Yeah, I think in like sort of this sense making space, there's like hype around Toronto just because a lot of people are from it. But when you're in Toronto, I don't know, it's like any other city. It's not like this crazy sense of aliveness going on, but there does seem to be a lot of like culture war stuff that originates here. Like the slut walk that was originally, I don't know if you remember that, but there was like it's kind of this feminist slut walk. There's a police officer in Toronto. He said women should, dress conservatively. He didn't word it like that, but he said something. And then, these feminists said, fuck that. And they called it the slut walk. And that went all over the world. And it was in India. And there's other stuff like that. A lot of incel attacks in Toronto. I think there was like 2 or 3 that got worldwide recognition. Or I mean, like, people were worldwide were aware of it. So a lot of stuff with the culture war seems to happen here. I don't know why. And I think that also gives it some kind of an interesting energy.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got started working with Peterson, how he became your therapist, and what maybe those first few sessions with him were like?
Yeah. So I first came across Peterson, I think when I was just leaving university. So just to get a timeline, I was 36 now. And then I don't know, I was like, teenager, early 20s when I was in university. And so last year, a friend of mine who was a psychology major invited me to a lecture series, and both Peterson and Vervaeke were teaching it, and a lot of stuff Vervaeke was saying was kind of over my head, but it was kind of interesting. And then Peterson started talking, and he had like this like Kermit the Frog voice, and he starts talking about dragons, and I'm just like, it was cool. I'm like how the hell is this psychology? Like that's when as a undergraduate philosophy major, I was just like, what the heck is this? But then something that he said about chaos, I thought I didn't vibe with him at first. He seemed like some kind of like grumpy guy that didn't make any sense to me. Why this is considered psychology? But something said about chaos really kind of like, kind of pinched me in a way, and then it stayed with me. And I remember I wrote this like spontaneous poem right after it. It just came out of me. Actually, I remember, I still remember it. And then it's related to my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. And yeah, then that was my first encounter with him. And then I realized he was sort of like a mini celebrity. He was on TVO, a local television show. He had a lecture series. He was quite popular in the psychological department, or in U of T, the psychology department, I should say. And yeah, so I was kind of following his work a little bit. And then when I was working at the University of Toronto, I was working in an administrative capacity there. And I went to, and the great thing about working at the university is like, I felt like I was still in school because I was on campus. And then I attended a lot of lectures and just like randomly sat in some. And then, the ones that are after or school, like symposiums and stuff. And I went to one, I think it was called Mind Matters. And again, John Vervaeke was there and Peterson was there. And this was kind of like my sort of reintroduction to Peterson. And then he just did this like really fucking badass presentation. And there's like, there's sort of like kind of like this kind of beef between John Vervaeke and Jordan Peterson was kind of cool, like, this like underlying thing going on. And then it felt like they were talking to each other. And I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? Like I started like liking him then. Like I didn't really vibe with him that much when I first saw him. And he mentioned he was a therapist. He had a practice. I had no idea about that. And then University of Toronto, they have like a really generous benefit plan. They had like that for psychotherapy. And I was like, fuck it, I'll just email him. And then, like who doesn't have issues? So I had issues, and then I emailed him, and then he said, sure. He emailed me back a month later, and he scheduled me in. And then I was his client for 2 years.
Yeah, you bring up some really interesting points about Peterson. What a strange figure in the psychology world that he is, just from sort of the status quo of how psychology is being taught in academia is really not tapping into the realms of depth psychology. And I think that Peterson, no matter what you think about him, has done so much to just bring that conversation back into the limelight. Standard psychology nowadays is really focusing on behavioral therapies that kind of scratch the ego surface, and his discourse and his lectures touch upon all of these sort of forgotten threads, you might say. Like maybe they talk a little bit about Freud in his psychology class, but you never really get into Jung anymore. He is seen as a kind of ostracized figure in many ways because of the realms that he was willing to dip into and study and to pull these insights from. And Peterson certainly brings in these mythological elements, talking about chaos, talking about the dragon, the hero's journey. And I think that's part of why he's been such a compelling figure, is that he's really synthesizing a lot of different worlds together and making it approachable for people.
Yeah, I totally agree. I never recall reading he was sort of an oddball, even when he was at Harvard. He was like the only guy there into Jung, I think. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And then he was, before he became famous, him and actual John Vervaeke and another guy at U of T, they were consistently rated like the life-changing professors at the University of Toronto. Because if you came in contact with them, it's like, it wasn't just about learning things in a disembodied way. Your life was affected by it. It was impacted by it.
Yeah.
And it's just the way he taught, his older lectures were all online, I still think. It's pretty intense how he taught.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear that about Vervaeke as well. I do think he has a very different energy and kind of message. He's much more Eastern. Maybe Arran can speak a little bit more to Vervaeke. You've listened to his series, but he's incredibly powerful as well, and really also is synthesizing all these different areas together to make sense of what's going on in our lives right now, and to provide all these different tools and different viewpoints to really examine these dynamics in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the synthesis point that Peter made is, or maybe you said it, I think you said it actually, is really important. That, I don't think what Peterson is doing can be called simply psychology. I don't think what Vervaeke is doing can simply be called psychology. It's a lot of it is philosophy, a lot of it's art.
Yeah.
It's blending a lot of different creative modalities into a scientific understanding. And I think that is why it's powerful for people, because most people don't actually have much of a scientific relationship with the world. Like, they just don't. They pretend to, but they really don't. And they really need to be spoken to in terms of, wisdom and the kind of feeling relationship we have to most things. And the stories and myths are actually what people experience when they think about reality. Like, they see it in this sort of narrative way, not a scientific way. So that's definitely what Peterson and Vervaeke are doing quite well.
Yeah. It's like the mythological language bridges the is and not.
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it.
Yeah. So one thing you explored with Peterson was working with dreams therapeutically. And I'm curious if you did any dream work before starting therapy sessions with Peterson.
I tried to do one of those lucid dreaming books, where you like a 30-day challenge and you start getting lucid dreams. So I tried that. And I tried practice where I recorded all my dreams, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just like writing them down. Like, well, that's interesting. So that was the extent of it. It was only with Peterson where there was more of a intense dream analysis.
Well, we do have some of your dreams.
Uh-oh.
I mean, part of the show is doing dreams at the end of the episode, and we do the dreams of audience members who write in, and we've even done our own dreams on the show. So it would be really fascinating to dive into some of Peter's dreams, or even are these dreams that you shared with Dr. Peterson as well?
So I sent you two dreams. The one that's about the woman is the one that I shared with Peterson. That one had that was sort of like almost the highlight, I would say, of the whole kind of 2-year therapy process I had with him. And then the other one I shared with the boy, that was not with Peterson. I didn't share that with him. But I will say this. I did have this habit of, after seeing him, I emailed him some of my dreams. Sometimes he responded, sometimes he didn't. Most times he didn't. I should be honest.
Maybe we can start with the little boy dream.
Yeah.
Because that seems like a more intuitive progression.
Sure. It's a little shorter. So this dream was fairly recent, correct, Peter? The one with the little boy.
Yeah, it was 2 years ago, maybe, when Epstein didn't kill himself. That was it happened like that day or day after. That's how I remember it.
Okay. All right. So here's the dream. I was the president of the United States of America, and it was during some kind of emergency. So I was ushered to this private room. In this room, I discovered a hidden stairwell, which I walked down. It led me to this dirty basement, and all these toys from my childhood were there. And so was the childhood version of myself. It seemed like he was stuck there and he could not leave. He was so happy to see me, and he just wanted to play. I was cold to him and said no, I was too busy for that. I am the president after all. I walked away, secretly heartbroken.
So I actually hadn't read this dream because Peter posted this in his journal entry. I guess this was maybe 8 months ago. You posted it, something like
In
that.
June, I think June 1st. That was that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hadn't read it for some reason, even though I was following Peter's journals. But you are relaying a dream that is like the dreams that I describe often, and sort of the kinds of dreams I've talked to with other men and with other men at the Stoa, which is sort of the lost little boy. And so me reading this dream, it's like, oh, I had no idea that you even had this theme going on in your life as well, because I had posited before that this must be an almost universal theme for men, is the banished little boy, the child who plays with toys, who's been told there's no place for you in my life anymore. You have to go away. Or like in Game of Thrones, there's like the kill the boy kind of theme that they have, where
Let the man be born.
Right, where Jon Snow needs to kill the boy in order to grow up. And I see that as a very common experience for men, of how they interpret their own maturity is actually one of like destroying whatever weakness is in them. Do you see that as being part of this pattern for you, Peter?
That was the read in sort of an abstract way, and to kind of feel into that dream, it was like wow, that was a shortened version I put into it. There's more details to it, but it was in when I was that age. I think the boy was, I don't know, 6 to 8 or something like that, and in the house I grew up with, the basement at that age, when I was at that age, it was kind of unfinished, so it was kind of a creepy basement, and so that was the basement that was that he was there. He was all by himself, and it was like he was by himself since he was like, for like years, for like 20 years he was by himself or something like that. And he just saw me and he got so excited, and then he just wanted to play, and he had all these, like, the old toys were there and everything. And then and I felt the boy, it was so fucking vivid. I felt it, or felt him. And I said, I can't play, I'm too important, in the dream, and I left. But everything was so vivid about it. And after I woke up, I just cried. I was so fucking tender. I was never that tender after a dream. And then me and Camille and I were in Montreal for a weekend. And then just the whole weekend, I was just crying. Like, I was walking the street, just like, I just wanted to collapse, and like, holding back my tears, just because the dream made me so fucking tender. And I didn't analyze it in the abstract way, because, it seemed obvious what it was about. But it was on a like somatic, very on a, like an embodied way. It was very integrating, I think, just kind of feeling into that lost, abandoned boy, and then bringing him back. And I feel a lot more integrated with that energy. I have like kind of a boyish, like, haha, like, like kind of charm, humor about me. I always had that. And even in the last, even the last shadow thing you guys did, shadow play thing you get at the Stoa, I had a really great relationship with that boy. You did an exercise where you summoned kind of the boy, and me and him were like awesome. Like, it's like a great relationship now, it feels like. And I think that dream helped bring that about.
Yeah, this is such an interesting example of that potent emergence of unconscious material. Some of the symbols in here are so classic that it like kind of just slaps you in the face, like the dissension of the stairwell. Often we see that in dreams as being able to move through these different layers of the psyche. So moving down into the basement, into that space that's, where we store things that we don't need anymore, the hidden, the forgotten, the aspects of the psyche that we no longer need up in those higher levels of conscious awareness. And there's the child and that energy that he's bringing to you of excitement and welcoming. It's no surprise to me that it was so tender for you after that, but it seems it's maybe been a couple years and there's been further integration of that boy's presence in your life, that you've been able to maybe take him out of the basement and be with him more consciously. Have you had any other dreams since this one where you've interacted with the little boy?
No, or maybe I did. Nothing comes to mind. But like, I feel him right now. He's present. The energy, and during that dream, I just felt him intimately, and I just felt his loneliness, and it just was so sad. It tore me up, just like knowing like a little boy feels that way, like so alone in a fucking basement by himself, playing with toys. He just wants to play with someone and gets rejected. Like, oh, I felt everything he felt. And that was sort of like, I guess, my reintroduction to him, that dream.
Yeah, I see you as having, I mean, like you just described with the exercise we did with the little boy, you're saying that you have a good relationship with the boy, and it seems like you two get along and you're friends. And I feel like I pick up on that in your work, in your journal entries, and in the kind of aesthetic that you like to go for at the Stoa, for instance. Like, it's very playful. It's serious, but not super serious, and it can be kind of jokey, and it can be kind of rascally, but like not too jokey, not too much of a rascal. And I feel like that balance of the playful side with the like let's get shit done side it seems balanced in you. And I think that it's interesting to see that reflected mythologically in your dreams and in your visualizations as well.
And it's kind of interesting, like I can kind of code switch and talk different perspectives, right? Like sometimes when I say the boy, it's sort of like a certain constellation of or emotions or energy or a subpersonality or whatever that I can feel right now. And there was a previous move where I used to shame that sort of energy because I wasn't living up to certain adult scripts. So it's like, oh, I need to live to these adult scripts before I engage in this thing. Kind of like entangling all that type of stuff really helped kind of be here with this boyish energy, because it's like, and I commonly say like having that boyish energy is attractive, like compared to like a man who's childish versus a man who's boyish, right? There's a different energy there. Like a childish is someone who wants someone else to take care of him, has a kind of a needy, whiny energy, and a boyish energy is sort of like this kind of youthful optimism. There's this kind of like excitement, the jouissance for life. And I think that's really great to have, because if you kind of like kill that spirit, then you're just like lugging around, dragging your ass through life.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's always really compelling to see, especially adults that are much older than myself, still have that youthful energy, that childlike wonder to them. Like they grew up, but at the same time, they didn't lose that part of themselves. And that is, in essence, that kind of mastery that you see when you can integrate these different parts. And even in the dream, you have that adult script, which is the president who's very serious and has a lot of responsibility and cannot play and is denying the inner child. And that became a marker of development that would unfold over the next few years for you, shows what happens really if you were to stick in that imbalanced place, that sense of loss, heartbrokenness, of maybe not being fully whole if the kid continued to stay in the basement. And now that relationship is much stronger. And I think that brings just such a wholeness of vitality and life energy.
And it's cool. Like I was the president, I think, of the United States in that dream. So it's like I reached sort of like an apex, or like kind of like the peak of success, in kind of like in a certain symbolic way. And then I had to go down to the basement and then find out, like, I'm incomplete.
Yeah, it's powerful.
I was wondering about the president of the United States, even though you're Canadian, of what it symbolized to you, do you think? And I think the idea it's like it is like sort of like the apex of success is interesting, but do you think there's anything kind of more sinister about it, of like being the president of the United States is actually a sort of warped responsibility, or requires a kind of way of being that is not truly yourself, that has like an unholy alliance with power, anything like that?
I don't know. I remember what just came to mind right now. I recall being a kid thinking like, the president of the United States was like the richest person in the world. It's like silly notions like that. Like, he's not the richest. Like, I was so surprised. So in my mind, when I was a little boy, at least, it's, that was like the most coolest, powerful, important thing you could be in the world. So it might've been just a projection of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, nothing there was no extra kind of like sinister felt sense associated with the president symbol in the dream.
Yeah, it makes sense that the childhood version of success and acclaim is even being presented in the dream. So really like the child is the real curator of that dream in all these different ways.
It's good. This is getting to the bottom of this dream finally.
All right.
Finally. All right. Should we move on to the second dream?
Let's do it. This is a juicy one.
Yeah.
This is a juicy one, and this is one that you actually did do with Peterson, correct?
Yep.
Okay. All right, here's the dream. I was in a room that resembled our living room when I was a child. I was with a woman who was dying of cancer. She was fake beautiful, done up like a Barbie doll with breast implants and bottled blonde hair, right out of a Playboy magazine from the late 90s. We were talking about her condition, and we had a really good connection. It was non-sexual, but emotional. Not in some romantic way, but in a pure connection sort of way. I felt bad for her and cared about her. After our conversation, we hugged and exchanged phone numbers. Then another man in the room started to talk to her. He looked like this infamous pickup artist whose work I've read. He started chatting to her and immediately asked her how much, as if she were a prostitute. Then she became all businesslike and gave him a number. I was surprised as I hadn't realized she was a prostitute. The pickup artist lookalike then started to see if he could get sex from her for free. She said no, and then they exchanged phone numbers. As she left, I started chatting to him. He had this braggy vibe. I was rather sad about the whole situation, mainly about how uninterested he was in her condition, which he did not even seem to know about. The dream ended with both of us received a text from her. She texted me a very warm message, indicating that it had been a nice chat, and she texted him her price.
It's a very interesting dream. There's like these dueling perspectives between these kind of inner psychic figures. If we look at all of these as representations of Peter, where you have this more compassionate, open, kind-hearted kind of dream ego perspective, tapping into what her experience is. And then you have this contrast, the pickup artist who's all business, who's kind of treating her as an object. And I'm curious to know, Peter, what was going on for you at this time when you had this dream, any sort of contexts or dynamics, especially like one thing I wrote down was like the withering away of the feminine, like this relationship where the feminine is being imaged in this dream as withering and dying of cancer. And were you in a period of time when you were working on that relationship with the inner feminine?
Yeah, like firstly, I just really like this dream. It's just like so perfect, like, you know, like, and it kind of just like it was like the target. It hit like exactly where it needed to hit at that point. So kind of to preface it, like things that were going on. If you recall, the social trauma I received, and then in high school, I was kind of like antisocial, and I felt like I had a lot of catching up to do. I felt like my social skills were like terrible. I had social anxiety. I had big time social anxiety. I couldn't even go to a Starbucks and order a coffee with my hands just like, you know, shaking. It was that bad. And so, you know, I think in one of the self-help books I was reading, it was like, you know, people skills are like the essential skills that you need. And that just stuck in my head. I'm like, okay, I'm fucking throwing the kitchen sink at this thing. So I did everything. I read every single kind of social book I could get my hands on, public speaking classes, Toastmasters, acting classes, a lot of improv, a lot of acting classes. I actually with some indie films too, which was quite funny. Hopefully they're buried on the internet. Wow. No one can find them. That's blackmail right there, existential blackmail.
That's what I'm doing after the episode
with the Wayback Machine. So I did the acting classes, and then I read a lot of pickup artist literature too. I was never a pickup artist, never really engaged in that, even though I did approach challenges and rejection challenges. I never was a pickup artist. But that led me to, since I knew, I read basically every book I could find on it. And that led me to befriend people who were in the pickup artist scene in Toronto. Because another thing about Toronto, they had a huge pickup artist scene.
Mm.
I don't know if you've ever been there, but there's this place called Maddie. It was like at one time it was just like it's like a virus, like swarming with pickup artists just approaching girls. It was ridiculous. But so I had a lot of buddies who were into that, and just wingmanning them and stuff like that. I was happy to do that at the time. And it was tempting, and this was a time too where I had a lot of, during the social anxiety high school phase, I had a lot of acne. And I think that probably was associated with the stress and anxiety and whatnot. And so once that started clearing up, I started getting into shape, started working out, lifting weights. I was like huge into style, like borderline metrosexual type of thing back in the day. And so I started like physically becoming more attractive. And I started becoming more knowledgeable in social dynamics, the sexual marketplace and all that type of stuff. And I just started becoming more kind of interpersonally attractive. My character became attractive. I knew basically the formula, if you will. And in contrast to someone who wasn't getting laid in high school, and now someone who was like, even though I was with Camille at the time, and, I loved her. I was, when I first met her, it's like, she was the one. And as an aside, like being in a relationship with Camille for over 10 years now, is one of the best, I should have mentioned this, one of the best acts of personal development, because you're not just growing with yourself, you're growing with another person. And one of the aspects of the relationship is truthfulness. So at that point, I was tempted though, because now I'm like in my late 20s, kind of attractive, could get younger women, could get older women. It was like, and just that lust was there, and getting the attention from women. And then knowing all my buddies, what they're doing and the quote unquote success that they were getting, I was really tempted. And so this was a conversation, a theme, a consistent one that I was having with Peterson. And it came up, and then he started talking about like, Osiris or whatever. So he went on this like mythological rant, and we never really kind of like really handled it. And then I remember, I think he just got like tired of me talking about it or something. And then he just like, boom. And then one session he was just like really fucking going at me, like trying to analyze this kind of consistent proclivity towards this desire for just random women. And then he kind of had this hunter metaphor, this target metaphor. And it was quite interesting. It just kind of like shook me up a little bit, knowing how objectifying pickup artistry is if you kind of like take it to its logical conclusion. And one of the challenges in one of the men's group, and I actually wrote about this again today, was doing 100 approach challenge in one day. So we approached 100 women. So I approached 100 women in one day, and then the thing was just to get their phone number or ask for their phone number, and then that's like a you get one right there. And so I did that in one day. I got like 37 numbers or something like that, or there's 27 or 37, I can't remember. I think I beat the other two guys though, that I was doing with.
That's all that matters.
That's all that matters. And I did it for not like to pick up women. I did it for kind of like confidence reasons, getting over rejection. But I remember it just like, it felt like a video game at the end. It was kind of creepy. You're just objectifying a person just to get like a target. And then this is what the pickup artists do. They train themselves to be essentially sociopaths in the social dynamic. And then Peterson's kind of analysis there just kind of like dawned on me. I'm like, oh my God, yes, that is, if I pursue that path, that's where I'm going to go. Right. Yeah. Just become someone who totally objectifies women, make them a target, whatever. So it kind of shook me up. Because I had this desire, I had some experiences, and then there was like, what should I do there? And then I had this dream the night after, or the same day. And it was that dream. And then the woman was very interesting too, because she had cancer. So she was sick, and she was like fake, like fake boobs, fake hair. And that was sort of the girl that, the type of girl that when I was, when my masturbation career started, when I was quite young, that like the Pamela Anderson archetype, that was the ideal. Okay. So I think there was something in play there. And then the most important thing of the dream was the ending of it. And I remember it was vivid. It was like, it was a weird thing because it felt like cinematic in a way, because they zoomed out on, it was like a split screen, and it was like the CD pickup artist cell phone, and then my cell phone, and then it was a zoom up on both cell phones, and then mine was just this warm, like, oh, thanks for actually treating me like a fucking human being and talking to me without wanting to get anything, like without being a target. And then the pickup artist was a number, because of her price, because she was the prostitute in the dream. And then it's like, wow. So if I go that route where I'm just objectifying women, targeting them, I'm going to have to pay a price.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the other way is just like, having a real connection. So it felt really like kind of crossroads, that dream. And immediately I knew which one I was going to pick, the one that leads to I-thou relationships. And that really, at least on an intellectual level, made me commit to my woman, Camille, to make it work. And then, that soon led to me asking her to marry me. So without that dream, without, that session with Peterson, I might not be married today. So I'm very grateful. There's a lot of other stuff he helped me with, but I'm very grateful for that dream in particular.
I want to pick up that Peterson thread about Osiris because it immediately caught my attention.
Of course you do.
Because in the myth, Osiris is murdered by like the dark brother, by Set, god of disorder, and he's like chopped up into a million pieces. But it's the feminine, it's Isis, who comes and puts him back together. And there's this interesting dynamic between that kind of internal chaotic principle that like usurps the throne, that brings destruction, and how that feminine principle comes in to restore order. So, I don't know where he was taking it, but just in regards to this dynamic of the destructive masculine by imaged in your dream as that pickup artist, that could be that Set version. That's that god of disorder that wants to come in and overpower and would ultimately kind of lead to this dispersal of your like energy and your spirit. And it's the feminine that really comes in as that mediating force to keep things tethered and whole, to even in some sense kind of heal the energy. So I think there's actually a really interesting connection there.
I kind of wonder if you feel as if the pickup artist in the dream, let's say maybe it's another version of you, like the two individuals in the dream, they're both Peter. One's the pickup artist who's objectifying the woman, turning her into a prostitute. One's the one who cares about her condition. And I'm wondering if you feel like the pickup artist has been transmuted into a virtuous pickup artist in some way in you, because you still evoke the same, at least from my perspective, you still evoke the same sort of manly kind of like gregarious pursuer of women who's like, oh, everyone at the Stoa is so fuckable, like, but I'm not going to do it. Like, is kind of.
Please, that's not going to help my PR if you say that. You give me two like in an instant. Yeah, I do. I like to be charitable. What you just said. I think there's like the Stoic daddy thing, right? There's like a playful persona where it's I'm sexing up, my image, because I'm there's Eros like flowing through me. I'm quite horny all the time, and it's almost like some of my more raunchy journal entries, which if you read them, I don't think anyone would feel like, oh, that's inappropriate. But it's it's expressing a certain aspect of me when I'm feeling kind of like, hot and bothered. So that's sort of like that I'm happy to play with that kind of persona, and it feels right. It feels authentic in the moment if it is alive. I'm not going to like just fucking force it. And then with the transmuted the virtuous pickup artist thing, I would say that, again, I was never a pickup artist, but I pretty much know all their tricks, like all their skill set in a way. And I view it as exaptive, like you can take that knowledge, that tools, and apply it to make yourself more attractive, or don't do things that would make you less attractive, essentially, because we all have these weird tics and stuff like that. And then that just applies to like picking up women. It actually makes you more attractive to other men. It's good for marketing, all that type of stuff. And it really the thing, and I wrote about actually the pickup artist today. I kind of went into the history of it, and knowing that stuff and wingmanning my friends and seeing them operate, and kind of being in quote unquote in the field, and similar to like being a trainer at Dale Carnegie Training and all that type of stuff, you get really sensitive of all these social dynamics at play, and you just speak a different language. Kind of like a socially holistic language, and then having some of these kind of tools and tricks kind of really informs that. And so I think the whole pickup artist got a bad rap in the mainstream, and I think deservedly so, because if you just pursue that for having sex with women, then it's going to lead to I thou relationships, to quote Martin Buber, and it makes you a sociopath. I think that is that's true, but you can learn the stuff and you can experience it as a form of assertiveness training or exposure therapy, get over your anxiety. And then if you get out, I think it can be quite helpful. So, and it's a dying art. No one does it anymore, especially during COVID. And the apps came, and then look maxing is a new movement that kind of replaced the whole pickup artist thing, because everyone's just improving their appearance. And then there's a lot of MGTOW incel people that kind of split off, that just kind of gave up the fetus approach on the sexual marketplace. So it's kind of like a lost art, really, all that type of stuff. But I found it's very helpful for me, not only in the social element, but a lot of other ways. Now coupled with the heart-based approach, with all these kind of somatic and interpersonal practices, is making kind of a really interesting combination, I find, in myself.
Yeah, the dream sort of has those two versions, the compassionate, heart-centered, more reciprocal energy with the pickup artist, and recognizing what qualities he does bring. But really it's the merging of the two that really brings probably a stronger dynamic of character, and really sort of similar to the other dream with the president and the child. There needs to be an integration of both sides, really, for there to be a sense of wholeness.
Yeah.
Well, Peter, again, is the creator of the Stoa. We've been running events at the Stoa. We've been promoting those events on this podcast. So the Shadow Play series will continue every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And we might even invite some guests from the Jungian community to appear on the Stoa to speak with us. That's in the works. But yes, if you want to check out Peter's work, go to thestoa.ca. There's lots of events, lots of really interesting, diverse things happening all the time. Thank you, Peter, very much for appearing on our podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
If you find this podcast useful, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/goldenshadoworg.
Do you have a dream you'd like us to analyze? Head over to goldenshadow.org to submit your dream for possible interpretation on a future episode.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time.